My argument against God is that there is nothing in the universe that cannot be explained, in prospect at least, without invoking that complex hypothesis. In other words, there are simpler explanations, or at least the prospect of simpler explanations, for absolutely everything. Because there are simpler explanations, or the prospect of them, there is no need to burden our understanding with the assertion that there is something more, namely an incomprehensible God. That billions of people believe to the contrary is of no consequence. Truth is not arrived at by majority vote. There are clearly huge psychological and cultural pressures imposed on people from an early age, and belief has been honed by the powerful into a potent weapon of crowd control. In the nasty, brutish brevity of an impoverished life, great comfort comes from the belief that there is better to come. There is also satisfaction that wrongdoers, wealthy perhaps on earth, will get their comeuppance in the afterlife. Even the meek are in with a chance. Angst and hope, angst at the prospect of one's own annihilation, and hope for unbounded ecstasy to come, are potent drivers into the jaws of belief. But the potency of the drivers and the huge majority of the hopers does not mean that the belief is correct. I've made a strong but carefully worded claim that there is nothing in the universe that cannot be explained or has the prospect of being explained without invoking a God. I need to justify that claim. If you accept my argument that a God is unnecessary, then your only recourse, if you insist on believing that there is a God, is to admit that you are driven by your heart rather than your head. But hearts are unreliable organs of knowledge. I shall deal with 6 points: contingency, fitness, purpose, miracles, including resurrections, theodicy, and morality. Obviously, and perhaps mercifully, I don't have time to be thorough on any of these topics, but perhaps by setting out the ground, we can turn to finer arguments later. In each case, I shall argue that modern science, the agent of the new Enlightenment, promises, I can offer no more than that, to elucidate what theology has long obscured. First, contingency. Science currently doesn't have the slightest clue about how a universe can come into existence out of absolutely nothing without intervention. I will leave aside whether the universal is eternal in some sense and without a beginning. That's something to be determined by observation, not by the ruminations of philosophy. We simply don't know. To make it harder for myself, I shall suppose for the sake of argument that there was a beginning. But there are 2 kinds of beginning, and it's important to distinguish them. One type of beginning is when an already existing universe gives rise to a daughter universe. Another type of a beginning is when absolutely nothing turns into a universe. I shall call that latter universe an original universe. Now, as you've just heard, some assert that a universe can spring from a quantum fluctuation. That may be true of a daughter universe, for an already existing mother universe has physical laws and a richly propertied vacuum. But when there is absolutely nothing, there are no physical laws, no quantum fluctuation. It's an empty term for the emergence of an original universe. And to make things harder for myself, but with an eye on trying to answer and not evade a deeply important question, I shall set aside the simpler problem of a daughter universe and consider the formation of an original universe. Did that original universe, although perhaps contingent, have to be caused? You have to realize that physical laws, which are summaries of observed behavior, come into existence as a universe comes into existence. That includes issues of causality. It is naive in the extreme to extrapolate our own experience of causality, which is essentially the working out of the consequences of physical laws, to an era before those laws existed. It is entirely possible that the unique event that marked the inception of the physical laws was itself an uncaused event. And what science has to do, in due course, is to discover how absolutely nothing can tumble into being and become apparently something. Is there any reason to believe that it might succeed? There's no doubt that it's actually edging towards that goal by burrowing back in time to discover that there was what there was immediately after the creation event. Look how far it has come in the past 100 years. We're starting to be confident about what first appeared, and we're certainly becoming aware of what needs to be known, such as refinements and perhaps replacements of general relativity and quantum theory. Once we know the nature of the newly formed universe, we can begin to speculate, as some actually already have, about the nature of the events that has given us the impression that there is something here in place of absolutely nothing. To say that we now have any knowledge at all about how it could happen would be a lie. But to say at this stage, and after so much progress, that God did it, would be a premature admission of defeat. There is currently no need for a creator God. Secondly, fitness. One role of God, it is argued, is to choose the values of the fundamental constants so that images of him can emerge. I will discount the evidence that God has an apparently greater interest in ensuring the presence of gas and rocks rather than organisms, and concede the fact that this universe has properties that allow for the emergence of life. There are two principal arguments that throw into doubt that a thoughtful God was involved in the design of the universe. First, it could be the case that only a certain mix of fundamental constants could come into existence for a viable universe, and the fact that they allow life is just a happy accident. Second, it could be the case, and theoretical models give some credence to it, that ours is not the only universe. And if there is more than one universe, then there is no obvious reason why there is not an infinite number of universes. Why stop at 2? Why stop at 42? It could be that all those universes have the same mix of fundamental constants, each one allowing life. Or it could be that the fundamental constants take random values, and it is inevitable that one, or even an infinity of them, permit the emergence of life. No design appears to be necessary, and an argument that posits an essential designer God is lazy rather than convincing. There is currently no need for a designer God. Thirdly, purpose. Philosophers and their obfuscating cousins, the theologians, has puzzled for centuries over the purpose of the universe. Why did God make it? Boredom with absolutely nothing? Anxious for admirers? Keen that we should have the pleasures and the pains of existence? The trouble is, there is absolutely no evidence that the universe has any purpose whatsoever. This, like causality, is an extrapolation of puny human experience to an inappropriate cosmic scale. Each of us, of course, has purposes of various kinds, and so surely, they say, the universe has one too. Science proceeds to elucidate the workings of the world without invoking purpose, and finds not one jot of evidence for it. In fact, in my view, there is a grandeur in an entity as great as a universe, just hanging there, wholly without purpose. And if there is no purpose, there is no need to posit a purposeful God. Fourthly, miracles. I shall adopt the perhaps naive but common view that a miracle involves the suspension of natural law. Miracles of that kind have never, ever been observed. There is not one atom of reliable evidence that God has ever intervened in the world to suspend his laws. That the path to canonization requires physicians to certify that an event cannot be explained except by God responding to intercession by a candidate saint should result in the physicians being struck off for incompetence if they aver that a cure has no natural explanation. Even that great, pivotal, purported miracle, the resurrection, is a total fabrication, with other explanations far more cogent than anything divine. Even given that Jesus existed and was crucified, was he merely in a coma? Was his disappearance a cover-up for political reasons? Was it Golgotha Gate? Did the women forget which of the many post-crucifixion holes in the ground he was buried in? The Gospels are wholly unreliable, being politically motivated propaganda manifestos written long after the events they purport to report. As no miracle has ever occurred, to assert that miracles are evidence for God is an empty argument. Theodicy. That an all-loving God permits evil to stalk the world, including, most dreadfully, the unconscious evil of evolution by natural selection, has puzzled theologians since the beginning of time, and all manner of convoluted explanations have been proposed. There is, of course, an extraordinarily simple explanation. There is no all-loving God. Indeed, to anyone with an open mind, the existence of evil, the torment, accident and neighbour visited upon the innocent, is in fact evidence against the existence of God. Morality, my sixth and final point. God is commonly presumed to be the fountainhead of love, and as such, the source of the distinction between good and evil. In my view, the distinction has emerged in the course of our evolutionary history. But it is not, it's not just the consequence of red in tooth and claw. Red in tooth and claw is coated in the milk of human kindness by our emerging ability to consider the consequences of our actions. To discover the roots of ethics, we might consult the so-called holy books for a variety of anecdotes and experiences that might match our own. But to understand the source of the distinction, we need to examine our ethological history, perhaps history itself, and certainly anthropology and psychology. Just as good manners have emerged for the sake of decorum and the avoidance of offense, so good behavior has emerged for the sake of survival. It is childish to presume that there is an umpire God, and adult to consider how our actions stabilize society. I've considered some of the arguments that purport to establish the existence of God and have shown that they carry little force. In every case, there is a more cogent, or at least greater the likelihood of discovering a more cogent explanation.